I opened the front door, and there they were, Grant and Haley, each carrying a box like it was the most natural thing in the world. Grant gave me a brief smile before brushing past me into the living room. "We're staying for a while," he said, as if I'd been expecting them. Before I could form a single word, Haley's voice floated up from the porch. "Dad, can you grab the one with the dishes? And don't let Mom lift anything heavy." And just like that, Haley's parents appeared, dragging coolers, duffel bags, and folding chairs. 4 of them now, moving as a unit, into my house. No one asked if I had space. No one asked if I was okay with it. I watched from the doorway as they shuffled across the wood floors I had refinished myself last fall. Haley set her purse on my reading chair. Her mother opened the fridge without looking at me. Grant walked down the hallway and shouted back, "We'll take the big bedroom, the one with the view." Still, I said nothing. I couldn't trust my voice just yet. Instead, I slipped on my jacket, walked out the back door, and made my way to the woodshed. The air smelled of sharp oak bark and cold soil. I stood for a long minute before opening the old metal drawer near the shelf where I kept extra seed for the birds. There was a notepad inside. I tore off a page and wrote the date in small, steady letters. Then I folded it in half and slipped it into the pocket of my coat. When I came back in, Grant was unpacking their electric kettle onto my kitchen counter. He glanced at me and said, "You'll love having more people around, Mom. It'll be fun." I nodded slowly, my eyes catching on the corner of a folded brochure sticking out of Haley's bag. Something about real estate law in North Carolina. I went to the sink, turned on the water, and started washing the same mug I'd been using for 3 years. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask how long they'd stay. That night, I lay in bed and listened to footsteps in every room but mine. I used to tell myself I'd rest when Grant was settled. That was the promise I made through every overnight shift, every double, every phone call that began with, "We're short today. Can you cover?" I'd come home from the ER with my legs shaking, wash the blood out of my scrubs, and check his homework before collapsing for 2 hours of sleep. Back then, the sound of sirens didn't rattle me as much as the quiet after they stopped. It meant someone had made it, or they hadn't. And either way, I had to keep going. When his father left for Florida with a woman half my age, I told Grant we'd be fine. And we were, barely. I paid for every bracket on his braces, every tutoring session he swore he didn't need. I sold my grandmother's ring to cover his first semester of college. I wanted him to have the kind of stability I never knew. When he got married, I stood beside them, proud and foolish, handing over a check for $20,000. "For your future," I'd said. They promised to visit often. They didn't. I stayed in Raleigh for a few more years, long enough to save enough for one last dream, the cabin. 5 acres of peace, far enough from the noise, close enough to the trees. I bought it with my own hands, my own name, my own money. No help, no loans, no son involved. Now Haley walks through the same house and says, "You should upgrade the locks, maybe get smart bulbs, fresh paint, a better kitchen island." I just nod. She doesn't understand that everything she criticizes was chosen carefully. The old brass handles, the uneven walls, the stove that hums when it cools. They're pieces of my life, not flaws to be fixed. That night, I wash the dinner plates while their laughter spills from the living room. Grant's voice echoes, easy, relaxed. Mine stays caught in my throat. I dry my hands, pick up the notepad from the drawer, and write another date underneath the first. It didn't take long before I started hearing the word "we" more than "she." "We'll be up at the mountain house for a while," Grant said over speakerphone one morning, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "My mom's place, but we're thinking of making it permanent." That word, permanent, stuck like a stone in my ribs. Haley had already started moving things around. My quilt was folded and stored in the linen closet, replaced by some beige throw with tassels. The wooden bowls I carved years ago were boxed and left near the door for donation. She brought in art prints, large, metallic, abstract, and placed them over the fireplace where my framed photo of a young Grant and me used to hang. Her father, without a word, changed the lock on the tool shed and left the new key on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, turned it over once, then slipped it into the drawer beneath the notepad. At night, I began locking my bedroom door. Not because I feared them, but because I no longer trusted what version of me they'd decided to rewrite. Then I heard it. I had walked past the guest room, meaning to remind Haley about trash pickup. Her voice floated through the half-open door. "Once she updates the title, we'll do the paperwork." "No, it's fine. Grant says it's almost ready." I stood still. When I was in the hospital last year for a fall, Grant had offered to bring me papers from home, insurance forms, prescription lists. I hadn't thought twice. Now I did. They thought they were clever. They thought I wouldn't notice their timing, their new politeness, their sudden interest in helping with paperwork. What they didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to ask, was that the title had already been changed months ago to a name they'd never seen. Grant wasn't always like this. When he was 6, he cried during a school play because I had missed it. The nurse I was covering for had called in sick, and the ER was short 2 techs. I remember driving home that night and sitting in the car for 10 minutes, just staring at the dark. He forgave me, of course, he always did. At 14, he stayed up late with me, helping me sort pills into the weekly organizer when my hands were too swollen from the cold. He'd boil pasta, heat canned soup, and sit quietly next to me when I dozed off during movies. We were a team once, just the 2 of us. But something shifted when he went off to college. He came back quieter. Not in a thoughtful way, just more measured, like everything needed to be phrased perfectly. Then came Haley, always composed, always smiling with her lips, but never her eyes. Their engagement was at a golf resort 3 states away. I wore a navy dress I'd found on clearance and offered to help with the cake. I wasn't asked to speak at the reception. I remember standing near the back wall next to a planter, watching her family pose for photos in coordinated outfits. They didn't invite me to join. Now Haley walks through my kitchen like it's a checklist to improve. "You still use regular butter?" she asked once, eyeing the block on the counter. "We usually eat clean." The fridge is filled with almond milk, imported water, and pre-cut vegetables in hard plastic shells. She throws out leftovers without asking. So I started eating outside on the porch with a mug and a slice of bread warmed just enough. Out there I could chew without listening to commentary. They never ask if I've eaten. One afternoon I caught Grant moving my cookbooks from the shelf. He looked at me and said, "You don't use these anymore, right?" I just nodded. Then I went inside and opened the drawer where I kept Simone Graves's business card. I left before sunrise, backing the truck out slow so the gravel wouldn't wake anyone. The road into town wound past fog-wrapped trees and dark pines still damp from last night's storm. I didn't turn on the radio. Simone Graves greeted me with a look that said she wasn't surprised. We'd spoken once a year since I bought the cabin. She'd helped set up the trust. Quiet woman, efficient, didn't ask for explanations unless she needed them. "I'd like to update the clause," I said, handing her the document we drafted last spring. She read it over, then looked up. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Upon my death, the cabin and the land around it transfer to the Land Trust of Western North Carolina. No inheritance, no probate, just forest and quiet." She took a breath, then passed me the pen. I signed. Then I asked for one more form, a written trespass notice for future use. It sat in a sealed envelope when I left her office, resting on the passenger seat beside a bag of groceries and a roll of twine. When I got home, no one noticed I'd been gone. Haley's parents were out walking the trail. Grant was on a conference call. I stepped through the side entrance and slipped the envelope into the locked drawer beneath my tool manuals. That night, I placed 3 apple slices under the bed in the guest room. A generous smear of peanut butter on each one, then a few sunflower seeds near the window ledge, and a cracker tucked just beneath the vent. I left the window cracked open 1/2 inch. Not wide enough for a raccoon, just enough for scent to drift. Outside, I stood on the porch in the dark, listening to the sounds I used to love. Cicadas, distant owls, the slow shifting breath of trees. Inside, Haley was wiping down the counter with a lemon-scented cloth, muttering about ants. Her mother complained about the musty air. Grant didn't say anything. I just leaned on the railing and whispered to no one in particular. Mountain life takes getting used to. It started with scratching, soft at first, barely louder than the wind in the gutters. Then came the thumps, small, quick, deliberate. I heard it before they did. By the 3rd night, I knew the squirrels had found their way in. Haley's mother mentioned it over breakfast. "There's something in the walls I heard chewing." "Oh," I said, buttering toast. "Could be squirrels. They like warm spaces this time of year." She paled. "Well, can you do something about it?" "I already called someone. They'll be out next week." That night, I heard them again. Only this time, they weren't alone. A raccoon had followed the scent. I could tell by the heavier steps, the distinct snuffling near the vents. Around midnight, there was a shriek, Haley's father yelling loud enough to rattle the windows. I didn't get up. The next morning, I found them all in the living room, pale and furious. Torn pillowcases sat in a pile. One curtain had claw marks. A lampshade was missing its trim. Grant confronted me in the hallway. "Were you keeping food in there?" I blinked. "Not lately." Haley crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous. We could have been bitten. There are rules, Mom. You can't just let wild animals run loose." I shrugged. "You're the ones who wanted the cabin life." They didn't find it funny. I offered to sleep in the guest room myself, just for a night or two, to see if the noise continued. They refused. Her father insisted they'd figure it out. But that night, I noticed them stuffing towels under the door and sealing the window with packing tape. Once the house was quiet, I crept into the hallway and dropped a small handful of sunflower seeds into the heating vent. The next morning, no one spoke to me. But the look Haley gave as she passed me in the kitchen said enough. I folded my napkin, finished my tea, and walked out to the garden beds I'd let go all spring. The soil was dry but still soft enough to take root. Dinner was lentil stew, thick and hot, the kind that settles into the bones on a cold evening. I served it with cornbread, still warm from the cast iron. No one touched it. Haley's mother stirred her bowl with her spoon, barely hiding her distaste. Then she set it down and looked straight at me. "It's not safe here. Not with the animals, the drafts, all the isolation. We need to look into the ownership of this place. What if something happens to you?" I wiped my hand slowly on a towel, then met her gaze. "It's already handled." She frowned. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Later that night, after the dishes were rinsed and the counters wiped down, I walked into the study and printed a single copy of the trust document. 3 pages, no embellishments, just signatures, dates, and the line that said what would happen when I died. I folded it once, cleanly, and left it on the dining table under the salt shaker. The next morning it was gone. At lunch, Grant held the pages in his hand, creased now from reading and rereading. "Why would you give it away?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, just confused, hurt maybe, or offended. I poured myself coffee before answering, because I'd rather the land belong to the forest than to people who see it as square footage. No one replied. Haley wouldn't meet my eyes. Her father stood and left the room. Her mother followed. The bowls were still full. Grant stayed for a moment, then placed the papers back on the table. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but nothing came. He walked out too. That night, the house was still. No laughter, no footsteps, no complaints, just the occasional scratch in the walls and the soft groan of cold timber settling in. I stood by the fireplace and watched the last ember fade, then turned out the light. The next morning I took the sealed envelope from the drawer and laid it gently on the kitchen counter. I woke before the light touched the windows, the house still thick with sleep. The air was cold enough to sting, but I moved through the kitchen with steady hands, filling the kettle, pulling on my coat. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the sink while it brewed, watching a crow pick at something near the tree line. Then I packed my gloves, a small towel, and the envelope. Before I left, I placed it on the kitchen counter, right between the fruit bowl and the unpaid water bill. I didn't need to say a word. The contents spoke for themselves. 30-day notice of termination of residency, signed, notarized, filed last Thursday with the clerk's office. No lease, no agreement, no right to stay. I drove to the nursery and picked up 2 trays of seedlings. I took my time, chatted with the woman at the register, bought a new pair of shears. I stayed long enough to be sure they'd all had a chance to see the envelope before I returned. When I walked back through the door, it was gone. Not moved, not misplaced. Gone. No one said anything. Haley's mother barely glanced up from her book. Her father avoided eye contact. Grant paced more than usual that day, but didn't mention it. At dinner, the table was quieter than I'd ever known it. Even the scraping of forks on plates felt loud. No one complained about the seasoning. No one gave unsolicited advice. I ate in peace. That night, I came into my room and noticed the bed had been made. My pillow fluffed, the blanket folded just so. Haley had been the last one in the hallway. It wasn't kindness, it was fear, and that was fine. I stood by the window for a while, listening to the wind shift through the branches. Then I pulled the curtain closed, turned out the light, and lay down to the soft creaking of wood, stretching into cold. The first box appeared by the door just after breakfast. A duffel bag followed. Then another bin, this one filled with Haley's throw pillows and rolled yoga mats. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. They were leaving. Grant packed slowly, folding clothes with the kind of care he never used when he moved in. Haley slammed cabinet doors with more force than necessary. Her parents hovered, muttering between themselves, something about manipulation and ungrateful women. No one looked at me. No one asked if I needed help with anything. No one thanked me for the months of free rent, the groceries, the electricity. That afternoon I opened all the windows, let the cold air pour in, sharp and clear. It smelled like pine and damp soil. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed once, long and high. I didn't speak. I didn't offer tea or parting words. I simply walked through the rooms and let the house breathe again. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, I sat on the porch and listened. Nothing. Just wind and the occasional thud of a pine cone falling. Later, I swept the living room. Beneath the couch, I found a single gray sock rolled halfway inside out. I carried it outside and set it on the porch rail. It stayed there for hours, untouched, until the wind lifted it and took it somewhere I didn't need to follow. Inside, the walls were quiet. The smell of lemon cleaner had faded. My quilts were back in place. The chairs faced the windows again. I built a fire and watched the first flames catch, listening to the wood crackle and settle into itself. Then I went to the garden and started pulling weeds that had grown while I looked away. The soil was softer than I expected, willing to give. By dusk, I had cleared enough to see the outline of where the old bench used to sit. I thought maybe it was time to build another. A week passed before I noticed how still the cabin had become. No more distant voices down the hall. No more footsteps at odd hours. The floorboards settled without resistance. The silence at last belonged to me. I split wood in the mornings, slowly, without urgency. The porch rail had faded in patches, so I sanded it smooth and painted it in soft strokes until it caught the afternoon light again. In the garden near the slope, I dug my hands into the soil, cleared out the weeds, turned over the earth. I planted lavender and spinach and a row of onions just to see if they'd take. Then I walked out to the fire ring behind the house where the stones had started to shift from years of weather and neglect. I righted them, cleared the ash, and found 2 old logs from the shed. I sawed the edges flat and built a bench. Nothing fancy, just solid enough to hold weight. The forest sounded different again. No more intrusion, just the steady murmur of wind in the branches, the soft clicks of insects returning to their own rhythms. The woods had aged around me, but now it felt like they remembered me again. That evening, I lit the fire. It burned low and slow, the kind that doesn't need tending. I sat for a while, hands warm, knees tucked under the quilt I'd brought out with me. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo. Grant at 7, missing tooth, crooked smile, standing in front of our old apartment with a stick in one hand and my purse in the other. I used to keep that photo on the fridge, then later in the back of a drawer. I'd nearly thrown it away once before, but couldn't. This time, I didn't hesitate. I leaned forward and placed it into the fire. The edges curled quickly, blackening at the corners, the image fading until there was nothing but soft red paper folding inward. I sat back and watched it turn to ash.